So, by way of introduction, my name is Dominic O'Shaughnessy, and both myself and Jessica Hayes are Chartered Tax Advisors with William Fry. William Fry is exclusively Taxand Ireland, Taxand being the world's largest independent organisation of tax advisors. I'm also a chartered structural engineer, having worked previously as an engineering director with a multidisciplinary engineering firm. We specialise in construction-related taxes, specifically capital allowances on property and relevant contracts tax. So this workshop will be literally a whistle-stop tour on the capital allowances regime and how it applies in Ireland, given the fact that the capital allowances regime is quite vast. So I apologise in advance, and if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to raise them. We'll have a question and answer session after the actual workshop. So without further ado, we'll get started. The first workshop will be in relation to capital allowances and how they're available on plant and machinery. As you can see, this particular talk will be of interest primarily to property developers who will be incurring costs in relation to plant and machinery on the development of buildings, purchasers of second-hand buildings with plant integrated, and how they may apportion that plant on the basis of its replacement costs. Owner-occupiers incurring capital costs and trade-related items, landlords and tenants, and their split on how they can actually qualify on the basis of their entitlement by virtue of bearing the burden of wear and tear, and any service providers providing advice to any and all of the above. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a brief overview of the capital allowances regime and how it does apply in Ireland, identifying how you can maximise your claim by identifying the various different costs that can be allocated, how to safeguard your entitlement by virtue of bearing the burden of wear and tear, and then how to safeguard that claim in the event of, for instance, a revenue audit, and by having the requisite documentation in place in support of your claim. So, capital allowances, in contrast to revenue expenditure, revenue expenditure incurred in the course or exclusively, wholly and exclusively for the purposes of your trade, is available as a deduction in the accounting period in which that expenditure was incurred. However, capital allowances on expenditure is available as a write-down over an 8-year period, specifically where they're standard capital allowances incurred on qualifying plant and machinery. So it's available on a straight line basis over a period of 8 years at 12.5% per annum. But there are what are called accelerated capital allowances, which may qualify on the likes of energy efficient equipment, whereby a 100% write-off is available in the year that the equipment is first used. The SEAI publish a list of qualifying plant and machinery that qualifies for accelerated capital allowances. The SEAI, that's the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, their website is information heavy. It can be quite difficult to navigate. I've provided the direct link on their website to this actual web page. So you can see there are a number of categories, product categories. The one that we've pulled up is refrigeration and cooling systems. And under that there's product technology, so for instance heat pumps, and that generates an entire list of product categories and product names that might qualify for capital allowances purposes on an accelerated basis, as in over a period of 1 year. There are 10 different categories that might qualify. As you can see, refrigeration and cooling systems, there's a minimum spend, but the minimus is actually quite low. As you can see, the minimum spends under the various different systems. It's a hugely generous capital allowances regime that's available on the basis of its green credentials. If you have an item of plant that you're considering incurring costs on, and it's not currently listed on the SEAI website, you can always apply. And it takes a number of weeks for it to actually be listed, but it's well worth doing. It's well worth waiting. Whatever you do, do not incur the cost and then wait for it to be listed, because if it's not listed at the time you incur the cost, you don't qualify. So capital allowances, both regimes can be carried forward indefinitely to you and used to shelter future taxable profits. So if you have insufficient profits against which to absorb them, you can carry them forward. Capital allowances may also be available on the purchase of second-hand buildings. You may claim allowances by apportioning the cost on that particular building. The purchase price may be apportioned to capital allowances, where the sales contract is only signed on the basis of a revenue briefing. So where the vendor has entered into a sale and the purchaser has entered into a sales contract, and you've allocated, and the vendor has allocated a price of €1 to plant and machinery, there's very little point in trying to apportion it because that's what you've signed up to. However, if the contract is silent, you can go ahead and apportion the sales price on the basis of qualifying plant and machinery that could be available. The apportionment calculation is as agreed, is an accepted practice in the UK and Ireland on the basis of the UK Customs and Evaluation Office calculation, which is shown here for good measure. So the apportioned value for plant and machinery is on the basis of the purchase price multiplied by the replacement cost of qualifying plant P&M over the replacement cost of P&M plus the replacement cost of the actual building itself and its bare site value. How to maximise your claim, and this is probably the most important issue. Plant and machinery is not defined in legislation, so there's a certain amount of scope and a certain amount of open to interpretation. Machinery is generally defined as whatever has motive power or moving parts. However, plant is not specifically defined, and this is where there's the additional scope to actually qualify for additional costs over and above what might be considered as standard plant and machinery in buildings. Your standards generally accepted plant and machinery are the likes of lifts, heating systems, air conditioning systems, water services, alarm and security systems, firefighting and prevention systems, and electrical wiring associated with each and any of the above. But there's additional items that, even under each one of those categories, that might qualify for capital allowances purposes, on the basis of also qualifying as plant and machinery. Say for instance for the lifts, it's about identifying what associated costs are involved with the installation of that lift. So you've got the lift car, its mechanism, but also the lifting beam, the lift pit, the excavation costs for the lift pit, the reinstatement costs, the lift slab, the rising walls associated with the lift, not the lift shaft itself, but that's considered to be part of the premises or part of the setting of the building. But then also professional fees incurred in the design of the lift may also qualify as qualifying expenditure for capital allowances purposes. Some additional items that may also qualify would include the likes of mobilisation costs, transportation costs, and installation costs. You can refer also to the 5 tests determined under case law, which the most important of which being the function test and the premises test. If that particular item of plant performs a function in the purposes of the trade, it will qualify. If, however, it forms part of the setting of the premises, it should not qualify. So, in applying the function tests, this mural has been found under case law. If you're installing a mural in a lobby in a hotel, it has been found to function as part of providing an ambience and atmosphere to the functioning of the trade and would qualify for capital allowances purposes. However, that same mural in an accountant's office would not qualify. Canopy over a forecourt has been found to qualify as part of the functioning of a trade, and not the setting of the premises. So, safeguarding your entitlement to claim capital allowances. Now, this is an important point. You cannot claim, both the landlord and the tenant cannot claim capital allowances on the same item of plant. And this is really critical, because if both parties do claim capital allowances on the same item of plant, they could leave themselves open to exposure to a revenue audit. So it's the party which bears the burden of the actual wear and tear which is entitled to claim those allowances. And this is not necessarily the party which incurred the initial capital expenditure. Leases to maintain, repair and where necessary replace suggest that the burden of wear and tear rests solely with the tenant. However, it has been found under case law that the burden of wear and tear is actually the party which bears the burden of replacement is the party that bears the burden of wear and tear. And a tenant is unlikely to have to replace in the case of a short lease. Now, standard life expectancy for the vast majority of plant and machinery is between 15 and 25 years. So as you can see from this list, that a tenant is unlikely to have to replace the vast majority of this plant and machinery on the basis of entering into a short lease, say for instance for 10 years. However, with the likes of a long lease, and where the wording in a lease agreement is silent in relation to which party to that lease is entitled to claim the allowances, there is a potential for both the tenant and the landlord to be entitled to claim those allowances or a split of the allowances on the basis of bearing the burden of wear and tear of replacement of that plant and machinery. So there's two approaches that could be adopted. Either at the very outset, the parties to the lease should insert watertight wording as to which party is entitled to claim the allowances, or carry out a tax depreciation report and identify which items of plant should be allocated to each party to the actual lease. As an example, this is a tax depreciation report that we have completed only recently. The spend of the development cost was in the region of 15 million, of which 3.6 billion qualified for plant and machinery, as plant and machinery for capital allowances purposes. The tenant entered into a 25-year lease, so on the face of it, the tenant could potentially qualify for the entire suite of capital allowances on plant and machinery, notwithstanding that the actual developer incurred the cost of its original instalment. But a break clause was installed into the lease, whereby the tenant could terminate the lease after a period of 15 years. The lease was silent in respect of which parties of the lease could claim capital allowances. So on the face of it, you would expect that the installation of the 15-year break clause, it was actually found that the landlord could qualify, or the developer could qualify for 3.1 million, and the tenant for 5 million of the allowances. Safeguarding one's claim. Now, revenue is very active in auditing claims in this particular area. So there are a number of pitfalls that may weaken a claim, namely a lack of sufficient documentation, an excessive claim, and as I mentioned previously, the potential for both parties to claim the allowances on the same items of plant and machinery. And this is the most critical issue because it leaves you exposed to a revenue audit and potential interest and penalties arising as a result. A detailed and comprehensive tax depreciation report can maximise a claim, identify the parties entitled to the claim, and withstand the revenue. And this brings us on to the next workshop, which is going to be presented by Jessica, and it has to do with industrial buildings and allowances. So I'm going to go to Jessica.
Hello everybody. So, by way of introduction, I'm with Dominic and William Fry Tax Advisors. Can you hear me okay? So, my experience is in, previously I'm a chartered accountant, chartered tax advisor, and I trained in KPMG with extensive experience in the area of construction companies, property developers, so this is an area now that I'm working on. So, as a general rule, capital allowances aren't available on buildings, expenditure incurring buildings, commercial buildings, that kind of thing. However, there are certain reliefs available where you come within the legislation and you're considered an industrial building. So this would be your factories, there's a long list of them. The most common ones we would see would be your factories, your private hospitals, your nursing homes, and these are generally claimed over 4 years. However, it's not available for expenditure in the existing building. It's only available on conversion, refurbishment or renovation of an existing building. And it's important to determine who owns the relevant interest in that building to see who is entitled to the relief. It's available for owner-occupiers and also for landlords where the tenant uses it for one of those purposes. Generally, these type of buildings would have a 25-year tax life with 4% per annum. And where it's a case that there is insufficient profits in the first couple of years, these allowances are available to carry forward. So I'm just going to briefly touch on, back in the day there was an initiative to encourage development in some of the more rural areas, urban areas, and they brought in some area-based incentives whereby rental accommodation and other commercial buildings, office blocks, which normally wouldn't be considered an industrial building, would qualify for the relief. Now these have been done away with now, but because some of these are coming to the end of their existing tax life, it's important just to be aware of them. There is a new scheme now in place called the Living City Initiative, which Dominic is going to touch on, and that seems to be the way that the new area-based incentives are going to go. I'm just going to briefly touch on Section 23 relief. This again is an old incentive that is now coming to the end of its tax life. However, there are people that have had qualified for it back in the day and now can carry these allowances forward to offset against future taxable income. They were remembered to be student accommodation or holiday cottages or rental accommodation in some of these urban areas or rural renewal areas. Again, it was only the expenditure on the conversion or renovation of these properties that would qualify. And I'm just going to briefly touch on these. This you might have heard in Finance Act 2012, they decided to put a restriction on the amount of allowances that were available to carry forward. So where you had a case of a Section 23 property and you claimed your rental relief up in year 1, but you didn't have income to offset against that, you could carry it forward for offset against your profits in future years. However, with effect from 31st of December 2014 or the end of the tax life of that building, these allowances can no longer be claimed. There is a carve-out though for active traders or developers, and the restriction doesn't apply to them. So I'll just give a brief example here of Joe Groggs, a property developer who's entitled to claim capital allowances on the construction of a commercial building. In year 1, he would have claimed 50% of the cost, and then for thereafter for 12 years at 4% and 2% in the final year. Because he's an active trader and developer, he's not caught by these rules and he's entitled to claim these allowances forward indefinitely. I'm just going to hand you over to Dominic now, who'll just touch on the Living City Initiative, and he said if you have any questions, we're around afterwards.
Okay. So just to conclude, this will be the final slide. This initiative was launched by Minister Noonan with a lot of publicity and a lot of fanfare, and it is actually a very generous initiative, and it's designed to regenerate and rejuvenate the inner city areas of the largest cities and towns in the country. So it is available for offset against your income tax at the marginal tax rates. So you can avail of a full tax deduction at your marginal rates. So you can avail of a tax deduction of up to 50% off your income tax over a period of 10 years in respect of residential developments, and over a period of 7 years at 15% per annum, and 10% in the final year for commercial developments. They are specifically allocated to special regeneration areas, or SRAs. So for instance, in the Dublin area, you can see it's predominantly the Old Georgian Dublin or Old Edwardian Dublin that's considered to qualify. So mainly the areas within the North Circular and South Circular roads. So it's the likes of Blessington Street, Marrowbone Lane, all of these areas qualify for this particular initiative. So if you're incurring costs on the refurbishment or conversion of these buildings and creating new apartments or new houses out of them, you can qualify. Now there are a number of conditions. So in relation to the scheme operates actually or commenced by ministerial order on the 5th of May 2015. It goes on for 5 years. It may well be extended given if there's sufficient uptake on it. There's a de minimis spend in respect of both the commercial and residential elements of 10% of the market value before work commences. Regarding the commercial premises, capital allowances are available on 100% of the spend over a period of 7 years. The pre-1915 requirement does not apply. Now this is important. It must though be used for retailing of goods or provision of services. The value of the tax relief is €200,000. So for instance, if you're a company, you can spend up to 1.6 million on the conversion and avail of a tax deduction of 200,000. In respect of residential premises, the conditions that apply, there's no particular cap on the spend, but I suppose you're limited by the fact that the maximum size of the house that can qualify is between 38 and 210 square metres. Now, when you consider this initiative is aimed at Old Georgian Dublin, the vast majority of these beautiful Old Georgian houses are well over 210 square metres in size. So this initiative is primarily aimed at the conversion of Old Georgian houses in Dublin into 3 or 4 self-contained units or apartments. This appears to be the model that this is aimed at, and whilst it isn't publicised as such, that appears to be what they're trying to achieve in repopulating Old Dublin and old other suburbs in the likes of Cork, around Summerhill and Evergreen Street. It is a hugely valuable initiative. In our discussions with revenue, there doesn't appear to be that much uptake on it at the moment. It could be a lack of awareness, or it could be a lack of commerciality, in that there's still a lot of degradation and deprivation in a lot of these inner city areas. But there is huge scope for it yet to come, I think, and I think it's a watch and wait and watch and see brief and see how it transpires in the future. But I do think that this could be the panacea for redeveloping old Dublin and the various other cities and larger towns around Ireland. It does apply to 6 of the larger towns. So it's Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Galway, Waterford, and I can't think of the other, but and Galway. So that brings us to the end of our workshop, the 2 workshops. If you do have any questions and answers, I think we're running out of time. But if you do have any questions, we can address them after the workshop. Thank you very much.